The cold was going to kill her before the wolves did. Elise stumbled through the snow, her thin dress soaked through, her fingers numb, her breath coming in ragged gasps that crystallized in the frozen air. She couldn't feel her feet anymore, couldn't feel much of anything except the desperate animal need to keep moving. Behind her, somewhere in the darkness of the forest, she could hear them. Not wolves, worse. Men. Her stepbrother's men, sent to drag her back to the estate she'd fled 3 hours ago. "You'll marry Lord Brennan whether you want to or not," Victor had snarled, his fingers bruising her arm. "He's paying a fortune for you, and I won't lose that money because you've got romantic notions about choice." Lord Brennan. A man 3 times her age with a reputation that made servants whisper and maids refuse to work in his household. A man who had looked at Elise during their introduction like she was meat to be devoured. She'd rather freeze to death than become his property. The snow was deeper here, dragging at her legs, slowing her down. She was leaving a trail, she knew that, but she couldn't stop. If she stopped, they would find her. If she stopped, she would die. Maybe dying was better than the alternative. Her foot caught on something buried beneath the snow, and she went down hard. The impact drove the breath from her lungs, and for a moment she simply lay there, face down in the cold, too exhausted to move. "Get up," she told herself. "Get up. Get up. Get up." Her body refused to obey. The cold was seeping into her bones now, spreading through her like poison. She'd heard that freezing to death was peaceful, that eventually you stopped feeling the cold and simply drifted away. Maybe that wouldn't be so bad. Maybe. Something warm settled over her shoulders. Elise's eyes flew open. She hadn't heard anyone approach, hadn't sensed anything except the relentless cold. But now there was weight on her back, fabric pooling around her and heat, blessed, impossible heat, soaking into her frozen skin. A cloak. Someone had draped a cloak over her. "Can you stand?" The voice was deep, rough, coming from somewhere above her. Elise tried to push herself up, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. She managed to turn her head just enough to see boots, fine black leather, dusted with snow, and legs clad in dark trousers. "I asked if you can stand." The voice again, closer now. Then hands were on her, large and impossibly warm, turning her over and lifting her from the snow like she weighed nothing at all. Elise found herself cradled against a broad chest, wrapped in a cloak that smelled of pine and wood smoke and something wild she couldn't name. She blinked up at the man holding her, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. He was enormous. That was the first thing she noticed. The sheer size of him, the width of his shoulders, the arms that held her like she was a child. His face was hard carved, all sharp angles and shadows, framed by dark hair that fell past his jaw. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Gold. Pure, molten gold, burning in the darkness like twin flames. "Who?" Her voice came out cracked, barely audible. "Who are you?" "Someone who's going to get you out of this cold." He was already moving, carrying her through the snow with long, sure strides. "How long have you been out here?" I don't know." "Hours. Hours." Something dangerous flickered in his golden eyes. "In a dress, no cloak, no supplies. Were you trying to die?" "I was trying to escape." The words slipped out before she could stop them. She tensed, waiting for him to demand an explanation, to threaten to return her to wherever she'd fled from. Instead, he simply said, "From what?" "My stepbrother. He's trying to force me to marry someone. A man who—" She couldn't finish. The memory of Lord Brennan's eyes on her made her stomach turn. The man carrying her was silent for a moment. Then his arms tightened around her, pulling her closer to his chest. "You're safe now," he said. "No one is forcing you to marry anyone." She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it ached. But she'd learned long ago that safety was an illusion, and kindness always came with a price. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Victor has men searching for me. If they find me, let them search." The words were calm, almost casual, but something in his tone made the hair on the back of her neck prickle. "They won't find you where I'm taking you, and if they do, they'll regret it." She should have been frightened. This man was a stranger, carrying her through a dark forest to an unknown destination. For all she knew, he was more dangerous than Victor and Lord Brennan combined. But wrapped in his cloak, pressed against his warmth, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Elise felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. They emerged from the forest to find horses waiting. 3 of them, attended by 2 men in crimson uniforms who snapped to attention the moment they saw their approach. "Your Majesty," one of them said, stepping forward. "We were about to send a search party." "Your Majesty." Elise's heart stuttered. She looked up at the man holding her, at those golden eyes that now seemed to burn even brighter in the torchlight. "You're the king," she breathed. "The Lichen King." "Kalen," he said. "My name is Kalen. And you are?" "Elise. Elise Thornwood." She tried to squirm out of his grip, suddenly horrified. "Your Majesty, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. Please, put me down. I shouldn't be." "You shouldn't be what? Carried by someone who found you half frozen in the snow?" His arms didn't loosen. If anything, they tightened. "You can barely stand. You're staying exactly where you are." "But—" "No arguments." He turned to his men. "We're returning to the palace. Have the healers ready when we arrive." "Yes, Your Majesty." He mounted the horse with her still in his arms, settling her across his lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. His cloak was still wrapped around her, cocooning her in warmth, and she found herself pressing closer to him despite her embarrassment. "You'll be warm soon," he murmured against her hair. "Just hold on." She didn't have the strength to argue, didn't have the strength for anything except clinging to his shirt and trying not to fall asleep against his chest. The last thing she remembered before consciousness slipped away was the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them and the impossible warmth of the king's arms around her. When she woke, she was in a bed softer than anything she'd ever known, in a room grander than anything she'd ever seen. A fire crackled in the hearth, and sunlight streamed through tall windows, and draped across the foot of the bed was the king's cloak. Elise sat up slowly, her head spinning. She was wearing clean clothes, a soft sleeping gown that wasn't hers. Someone had bathed her, dressed her, tended to her while she slept. The door opened, and she looked up to find the Lichen King standing in the entrance. He looked different in the daylight, still massive, still imposing, but less like a creature from a dark fairy tale and more like a man. He'd changed clothes, traded his snow-covered travelling attire for a simple white shirt and dark trousers. But his eyes were the same, gold and burning, and fixed on her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You're awake." He crossed to her bedside and stopped, keeping a careful distance. "How do you feel?" "Better." Her voice was hoarse. "Your Majesty, I should return this." She reached for the cloak at the foot of the bed, holding it out to him with trembling hands. He didn't take it. "Keep it," he said. I can't. It's yours. It must be worth more than everything I've ever owned. I couldn't possibly. Keep it. His voice dropped lower, rougher. Something flickered in his golden eyes, something she couldn't name, but that made warmth bloom in her chest despite herself. You'll always be cold without me, he said quietly, and I don't intend to let you be cold ever again. Elise stared at him, the cloak clutched in her hands, her heart pounding against her ribs. She didn't understand. None of this made sense. Kings didn't rescue freezing girls from forests. Kings didn't give away their cloaks and speak in riddles about warmth and cold. Why? She whispered. Why are you helping me? The Lichen King was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd expected. Because I think, he said, that I've been waiting a very long time to find you. And Elise, still clutching the cloak that had saved her life, found herself unable to look away. 3 days passed before Elise felt strong enough to leave her chambers. 3 days of rest in the softest bed she'd ever known, of meals brought on silver trays, of servants who called her "my lady" and asked if she needed anything at all. 3 days of staring at the king's cloak, which she'd folded carefully and placed on the chair by her bed, close enough to touch whenever the cold crept back into her bones, which was often. Despite the roaring fire and the thick blankets, she couldn't seem to get warm, not truly warm, not the way she'd felt wrapped in his arms as he carried her through the snow. On the third evening, Kaelin came to see her. She heard the knock and expected a servant. Instead, the Lichen King filled her doorway, dressed simply in dark clothes, his golden eyes finding hers immediately. "You're looking better," he said. "May I come in?" She nodded, pulling the blankets higher around her shoulders, even though she was already dressed. Old habits, making herself smaller. He noticed. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing about it. Instead, he crossed to the fireplace and added another log to the flames, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. "The healers tell me you'll make a full recovery," he said, still facing the fire. "No lasting damage from the cold. You were lucky I found you when I did." Lucky. The word tasted strange on her tongue. She'd never been lucky before. "Why were you in the forest? In the middle of a snowstorm?" "I was hunting." He turned to face her, leaning against the mantel. "Or I was supposed to be. Something drew me off the path. A feeling I couldn't explain." His golden eyes held hers. "I think now I know what it was." Elise's heart stuttered. "I don't understand." "Don't you?" He moved toward her, each step deliberate, and stopped beside the chair where his cloak was folded. He picked it up, running the fabric through his fingers. "When I found you in that snow, when I caught your scent for the first time, something happened. Something I've been waiting 300 years to feel." 300? She shook her head. "What are you talking about?" "The mate bond." His voice was quiet, certain. "You're my mate, Elise. My fated mate. The one my wolf has been searching for since before your grandmother was born." She stared at him. The words made no sense. Mate bonds were legends, fairy tales, the kind of stories mothers whispered to daughters who dreamed of princes. They didn't happen to real people. They certainly didn't happen to her, a girl with nothing, fleeing a forced marriage, worth less than the gown she'd been wearing when she fled. "That's impossible," she said. "I'm no one. I'm nothing. I don't even have a wolf. I mean, I do, but she's so weak I can barely feel her. I couldn't possibly be." "You are." He crossed to the bed, and sat on its edge, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. I know you don't believe it. I know you've spent your life being told you're worthless. But I felt the bond the moment I touched you. My wolf recognized you, and I suspect, somewhere deep down, your wolf recognized me too. Elise thought about the strange sensation she'd felt when he lifted her from the snow, the way the cold had seemed to recede the moment he touched her, the inexplicable safety she'd felt in his arms, despite knowing nothing about him. Even if it's true, she said slowly, what does it matter? My stepbrother will be searching for me. He'll come here. He'll demand, let him come. The words were calm, but something dangerous lurked beneath them. Let him stand before me and demand anything. I would very much enjoy showing him what happens to men who try to sell women like property. A shiver ran down her spine, not from cold, but from something else entirely. You don't know what he's capable of, she whispered. Victor has connections, allies. Lord Brennan alone commands half the southern territories. If you anger them, I command the entire realm. Kaelin's voice was soft but absolute. I am the Lycan king, and you are my mate. There is no force in this world powerful enough to take you from me. Elise wanted to believe him, wanted it so desperately she could taste it. But she'd learned long ago that wanting something didn't make it true. Why do you care? The question came out broken. Even if this bond exists, you could ignore it. You're a king. You could have anyone. Why would you want someone like me? Someone with nothing to offer? Kaelin was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm against her frozen fingers, his grip gentle but steady. She should have pulled away, should have maintained distance, protected herself, remembered that trusting people only led to pain. She didn't pull away. Tell me about yourself, he said. Not your stepbrother, not the man they tried to sell you to. You. Tell me who Elise Thornwood is when she's not running for her life. The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. Her stepbrother saw her as a burden, then as currency. Lord Brennan saw her as a possession. The servants in her father's house had seen her as an orphan to be pitied. No one had ever seen her as a person worth knowing. I don't know who I am, she admitted. I haven't been allowed to find out. My mother died when I was 6. My father when I was 12. After that, Victor controlled everything. What I wore, what I ate, who I spoke to. I wasn't raised to be a person. I was raised to be a bargaining chip. What did you want to be? What? Before they controlled everything. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. When you were young enough to dream. What did you want to be? Elise thought about it. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to remember. A healer, she said finally. My mother was a healer before she married my father. She used to take me with her to the village, let me help mix poultices and bandage wounds. I loved it. The idea that I could help people, ease their suffering. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Foolish, I know. It's not foolish. Kaelin's voice was rough. It's beautiful. And it's exactly the kind of person I would expect my mate to be. Someone who wants to help others, even after the world has given her every reason to be selfish. Heat crept up her cheeks. You're too kind. I'm not kind at all, actually. The corner of his mouth lifted. Ask anyone in my court. They'll tell you I'm cold, distant, impossible to please. I've been called heartless more times than I can count. You saved my life. You wrapped me in your own cloak and carried me through a blizzard. That doesn't seem heartless. That's because you're the exception. His golden eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. You're the only thing that's made me feel warm in 300 years. Elise didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process the way he was looking at her, like she was precious, like she mattered, like she was something to be treasured rather than traded. I still don't believe it, she whispered. I can't. If I believe it, and it turns out to be a lie, then don't believe it yet. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Soft, reverent, achingly tender. Let me prove it to you instead. Let me show you day by day that you're safe here, that you matter, that you're worth more than anything your stepbrother tried to sell you for. His lips lingered on her skin, and Elise felt something flutter in her chest. Something dangerous. Something that felt terrifyingly like hope. Keep the cloak, he said again, releasing her hand and rising to his feet. Wear it whenever you're cold. And remember, you don't have to be cold anymore. Not if you don't want to be. He was at the door before she found her voice. Kaelin. He stopped, turned. Something flickered in his golden eyes at the sound of his name on her lips. Thank you, she said, for finding me, for everything. You don't have to thank me. His voice was soft. You never have to thank me for treating you the way you deserve to be treated. He was gone before she could respond. Elise sat alone in her chambers, the warmth of his kiss still lingering on her knuckles. After a long moment, she reached for the cloak on the chair and wrapped it around her shoulders. It smelled like him, pine and wood smoke and something wild. For the first time in days, she felt truly warm. She didn't trust it. She couldn't trust it. But as she pulled the cloak tighter and breathed in his scent, she found herself hoping anyway. The nightmare found her a week later. She was back at the Thornwood estate, in the parlour where Victor had told her about the marriage arrangement. But this time, Lord Brennan was there too, standing in the corner, watching her with those hungry eyes that had made her skin crawl from the first moment she'd seen them. You belong to me now, he said, his voice slithering across her skin like something rotten. Did you really think you could run? She tried to flee, but Victor grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the same bruises he'd left before. Ungrateful wretch. After everything I've done for you. Lord Brennan moved closer, closer. His hand reached for her face. Elise woke, screaming. She was tangled in blankets, drenched in sweat, the cloak twisted around her body like a lifeline. Her heart slammed against her ribs, and her breath came in ragged gasps that tore at her throat. The door burst open. Kaelin stood in the entrance, golden eyes blazing, his massive frame tense as if expecting an attack. When he saw her alone, saw the terror on her face, his expression shifted from battle-ready to something softer, something aching. Nightmare, he said, not a question. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He crossed to her bedside, but didn't touch her, didn't crowd her. He simply crouched beside the bed, putting himself at her eye level, and waited. I'm sorry. The words came out strangled. I didn't mean to wake you, I didn't. Don't apologize. His voice was gentle but firm. You never have to apologize for being afraid. Not to me. Elise pulled the cloak tighter around her shoulders, breathing in his scent, trying to anchor herself to the present. She was in the palace. She was safe. Victor and Lord Brennan were far away, but the fear remained, cold and sharp in her chest. Do you want to talk about it? Kaelin asked. She shook her head. Then, almost immediately, she heard herself speak. Lord Brennan, the man Victor was selling me to. Her voice was barely a whisper. I only met him once, at a dinner where he was supposed to evaluate me, like livestock at auction. Kaelin's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, just listened. He looked at me like I was already his, like I was something to be consumed. She shuddered. He told Victor, right in front of me, all the things he planned to do once I was his wife, the ways he would train me. The word came out bitter. He said he liked that I seemed frightened. He said fear made women more compliant. Elise, Kaelin's voice was rough. Look at me. She raised her eyes to meet his. In the dim firelight, his face was hard as granite, but his golden eyes burned with something that looked like barely contained fury. That man will never touch you, he said. If he comes within 100 miles of this palace, I will tear him apart with my bare hands. Do you understand? She should have been frightened by the violence in his voice. Instead, she felt something loosen in her chest. Why? The question she kept asking, the question she couldn't stop asking. Why do you care so much about someone you barely know? Kaelin was quiet for a long moment. Then he sat on the edge of her bed, close but not touching, and spoke. When I was young, before I became king, my mother was in a marriage like the one they planned for you, sold to my father for political advantage, treated as property rather than a person. His voice was flat, controlled. She was kind and gentle, and deserved so much better than what she got. He broke her, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. She died when I was 30, and I don't think she'd truly been alive for years before that. Elise's heart clenched. I'm sorry. I swore on her grave that I would never let another woman suffer what she suffered, that I would use whatever power I had to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. His golden eyes held hers. And then I found you in that snow, half frozen, terrified, running from the same fate that destroyed my mother. Do you understand now? Why I care? She did. For the first time, she truly did. You saved me, she whispered. Not just from the cold, from everything. You saved yourself. He shook his head. You ran. You fought. You chose to die in that forest rather than submit to a monster. I just happened to find you before the cold did. But if you hadn't... But I did. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was warm against her frozen fingers, always frozen, except when he touched her. I found you, and I'm not letting go. Elise looked down at their joined hands. His was so much larger than hers, calloused and strong, capable of the violence he'd promised. But his grip was gentle, always gentle. My wolf, she said quietly. She's awake. Kaelin went still. What do you mean? I've barely felt her my whole life. Everyone said she was too weak to matter. But since I came here, since you found me, she's been stirring, growing stronger. She pressed her free hand to her chest, where something warm and wild was unfurling for the first time. Right now, she's reaching toward you. His golden eyes flared bright, amber bleeding into gold. That's the bond. She feels what I feel, what my wolf feels. What does your wolf feel? The question hung between them. Kaelin's grip on her hand tightened, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with barely contained emotion. Mine, he said. That's all he can say. That's all he's been saying since the moment I caught your scent in that forest. Mine, mine, mine. He was so close now, close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his golden eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. Her wolf was howling inside her, straining toward him, and every nerve in her body was alight with awareness. "Kaelin," she breathed, "I want to kiss you." The words came out strained, like they'd been torn from him. "I've wanted to kiss you since I carried you through that blizzard, but I won't. Not until you're ready. Not until you choose it." Why? Because you've spent your entire life having choices made for you. Because the last thing you need is another man taking what he wants without asking. His forehead dropped to rest against hers, their breath mingling in the space between them. "I told you I'd prove myself. I told you I'd show you that you're safe. And safe means waiting until you're certain." Her eyes burned. No one had ever waited for her before. No one had ever put her needs above their own wants. "What if I'm never certain?" she whispered. "What if I'm too broken to trust anyone?" "You're not broken." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "You're healing. There's a difference, and I'll wait as long as it takes for you to see that." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, soft, tender, achingly restrained, and then released her hand. "Try to sleep," he said, rising from the bed. "I'll be right outside if you need me." "You don't have to. I want to." His lips curved in that almost smile she was beginning to crave. "That's the thing about mates, Elise. When you hurt, I hurt. When you're afraid, I want to stand between you and whatever frightens you. It's not obligation. It's instinct." He was at the door when she called out, "Kaelin." He turned. "Stay." The word escaped before she could stop it. "Please. I don't want to be alone." Something shifted in his expression, something raw and vulnerable that made him look less like a king and more like a man who had been lonely for a very long time. He came back to her bed, settled into the chair beside it, and took her hand. "Sleep," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Elise closed her eyes, his warmth anchoring her, his scent surrounding her. The cloak was still wrapped around her shoulders, but she didn't need it now, not with him beside her. She was asleep within minutes. And when she woke at dawn to find him still there, his hand still holding hers, his golden eyes watching her with something that looked terrifyingly like love, she realized the truth she'd been fighting. She was falling for him, the Lycan King, the man who had saved her from the cold and promised to save her from everything else, the man who waited. She was falling, and she had no idea how to stop. She wasn't sure she wanted to. They came for her 2 weeks later. Elise was in the palace gardens, wrapped in Kaelin's cloak despite the mild afternoon sun, when she heard the commotion. Raised voices at the gates, the clash of boots on stone, and then a voice that turned her blood to ice. "I demand to see my sister. She is property of the Thornwood estate, and I will not be denied." Victor. Her legs went weak. She grabbed the edge of a stone bench to steady herself, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. No. No, he couldn't be here. He couldn't have found her. She was supposed to be safe. She was supposed to be... "Elise!" Kaelin's voice cut through her panic. She looked up to find him striding across the garden toward her, his face a mask of controlled fury. "They're here," she whispered. "Victor is..." "I know." He reached her side and took her hands, steadying her. "My guards have them at the gate. They won't get past without my permission." "But he'll demand..." He has connections. Lord Brennan? Lord Brennan is with him. Caelan's jaw tightened. Along with a dozen men, and what appears to be a magistrate carrying a document they claim gives them legal right to take you. The world tilted. Of course. Of course Victor would find a way. He always found a way. He'd probably bribed someone, forged something, manufactured a legal claim that would force even a king to comply. I should go, she heard herself say. If they have legal standing, you can't. I won't let you destroy your authority for me. I'm not worth. Stop. The word was sharp. Stop telling me you're not worth things. You're worth everything, Elise. Everything. But listen to me. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. I don't care what documents they've brought. I don't care what laws they claim to invoke. You are my mate. You are under my protection. And no one is taking you from me. Tears burned at the back of her eyes. You can't fight the law, Caelan. Not even kings can. Watch me. His golden eyes blazed. But first, I need to know something. I need to hear it from you, clearly, with no room for doubt. What? Do you want to stay? His voice softened. Not because I'm offering safety, not because you're afraid of them. Do you, Elise Thornwood, want to be here? With me? She stared up at him. This man who had carried her through a blizzard, who had given her his cloak and promised she would never be cold again, who had held her hand through nightmares and waited patiently for her to heal. Did she want to stay? The answer was so obvious it almost made her laugh. Yes, she whispered. I want to stay. I want to be here. With you. Something broke in his expression. Relief, joy, fierce determination all crashing together. Then let's go show them what that means. He took her hand and led her into the palace, through corridors that seemed to blur past until they reached the great hall. The doors were closed, but she could hear voices on the other side. Victor's sharp demands, Lord Brennan's oily tones, the measured responses of Caelan's guards. Caelan stopped and turned to face her. You don't have to come in. You can wait here, and I'll handle this. No. The word came out stronger than she expected. I've spent my whole life letting other people handle things for me, letting other people make decisions about my future. She squared her shoulders. Not anymore. Pride flickered in his golden eyes. That's my mate. They walked through the doors together. The great hall fell silent. Victor stood at the center of the room, flanked by Lord Brennan and a nervous-looking man clutching a sheaf of papers. Behind them, a dozen armed men shifted uneasily under the watchful eyes of twice as many royal guards. When Victor saw Elise, his face contorted with rage. There she is! He pointed at her like she was a criminal. You see? I told you she was here. The king has been harboring my property. I am not your property. Elise's voice rang through the hall, cutting him off. Victor blinked, momentarily thrown. He'd never heard her speak back before. No one had. Elise. His voice turned silky, condescending. You're confused. You don't know what you're saying. Come along now, and we'll forget this little rebellion ever happened. I know exactly what I'm saying. She stepped forward, and Victor actually took a step back. I am not your property. I was never your property. I am a person you tried to sell to a monster because you wanted his money. Now, see here, Lord Brennan started, but Elise rounded on him. And you. Her voice dripped with contempt she'd never allowed herself to feel before. You looked at me like I was meat. You told my stepbrother, in front of me, all the things you planned to do to me. You said you liked that I was frightened. She took another step toward him, and this time, he was the one who flinched. I hope it haunts you forever, knowing that the woman you wanted to train is standing in the king's hall, telling you exactly how pathetic you are. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Then Lord Brennan's face twisted with fury. You little… He lunged forward, hand raised. He never made contact. Kaelin moved so fast Elise barely saw it. One moment Lord Brennan was reaching for her. The next, the king had him by the throat, lifted off the ground, his feet dangling uselessly. You were warned, Kaelin said quietly. The room had gone deathly still. You were warned what would happen if you tried to touch her. Lord Brennan clawed at the hand around his throat, his face purpling. You can't… The law, the magistrate. Read your document. Kaelin's voice was ice. Read every word of it, and then watch me tear it apart. The magistrate stepped forward with trembling hands, his voice shaking as he read the legal claim. Some obscure statute about family guardianship and betrothal contracts and debts owed to the Thornwood estate. Kaelin listened without expression. When the magistrate finished, he dropped Lord Brennan to the floor in a gasping heap and turned to address the room. That law, he said, applies to unclaimed women of no pack affiliation. It has no bearing on the mate of the Lycan King. Victor's face went white. Mate, that's impossible. She's nobody. She's nothing. She couldn't possibly… She is everything. Kaelin turned to Elise, and the tenderness in his expression made her heart ache. She is my fated mate, my future queen, and as of this moment, she is under the full protection of the crown. He held out his hand to her. Elise looked at it, at this hand that had pulled her from the snow, that had held hers through nightmares, that offered her a future she'd never dared to dream of. She took it. He pulled her to his side and addressed the room once more. Lord Brennan, you are under arrest for attempted assault on the future queen. Victor Thornwood, you are under arrest for conspiracy to sell a woman into forced marriage. His golden eyes swept the assembled men. Take them, all of them. The guards moved instantly. Victor screamed protests as they dragged him away. Lord Brennan was still gasping for breath on the floor. And then they were gone, and the hall was empty, and Elise was standing with Kaelin's hand still holding hers. You called me your future queen, she said quietly. I did. He turned to face her, both hands taking hers. If you'll have me. Kaelin, I know it's fast. I know you've barely begun to heal. But I love you, Elise. I've loved you since I pulled you from that snow. And I don't want to spend another day pretending otherwise. He loved her. The Lycan King loved her. This powerful, patient, impossibly kind man loved her. I love you too, she whispered. His expression shattered into something raw and beautiful. Say it again. I love you. She rose on her toes, bringing her face closer to his. I choose you. I choose this. I choose us. He kissed her. It was everything she'd been waiting for, fierce and tender and full of promise. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and she kissed him back with everything she had. All the fear, all the hope, all the love she'd been too afraid to feel came pouring out of her. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. Mine, he growled softly. Yours, she agreed. And you're mine. His smile was fierce and tender and full of promise. Always. The bonding ceremony took place on the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. Elise stood before the mirror in the Queen's chambers, barely recognizing the woman who stared back at her. The gown was white velvet, trimmed with silver fur that caught the candlelight like fresh snow. Her dark hair had been woven with crystals that sparkled like ice, and draped across her shoulders, altered to fit her perfectly, was the cloak. His cloak. The one he'd wrapped around her in that frozen forest. The one that had saved her life. When she'd asked him if she could wear it for the ceremony, something had broken in his expression. He'd pulled her into his arms and held her for a long time without speaking. When he finally let go, his golden eyes had been suspiciously bright. "It was always meant to be yours," he'd said, "just like I was." A knock at the door made her turn. "Come in." Marin, the elderly maid, who had become something like a mother to her over the past months, entered with tears already streaming down her cheeks. "Oh, my lady, you're a vision." "I don't feel like a vision." But she was smiling as she said it. "I feel like I'm dreaming, like I'm going to wake up any moment and find myself back in that snow." "This is no dream." Marin crossed to her and took her hands. "This is your life now. The life you deserve. The life you fought for." Elise blinked back the sting of tears. She'd cried enough over the past months. Tears of healing, of joy, of slowly learning what it meant to be warm. Tonight, she wanted to save her tears for happiness. "I'm ready," she said. The great hall had been transformed into a winter wonderland. Thousands of candles cast golden light across walls draped in white silk. Evergreen boughs and winter roses cascaded from every surface, filling the air with sweetness. Snow fell gently outside the towering windows, and inside, hundreds of witnesses had gathered to watch their king take his mate. But Elise barely noticed any of it. She only saw Calen. He stood at the end of the aisle, dressed in black and silver, looking every inch the legendary Lycan king. But when his golden eyes found her, when he saw her walking toward him, draped in the cloak he'd given her that frozen night, his composure shattered. She watched the mighty king of the realm blink rapidly, watched him press his lips together to keep them from trembling, watched him struggle to contain emotions that 300 years of rule had taught him to hide. When she reached him, he took her hands, and his voice came out rough. "You're wearing it. You told me to keep it." She smiled up at him through her own tears. "You told me I'd always be cold without you." "And are you?" His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "Cold?" "Not anymore." She squeezed his hands. "I don't think I'll ever be cold again." The ceremony was ancient and beautiful. Vows spoken in the old tongue, promises exchanged under a canopy of candlelight, and falling snow visible through the windows above. When the officiant asked if she would accept Calen as her mate, her partner, her equal, Elise's voice rang clear through the silent hall. "I will." And when Calen spoke his vows, his voice carried to every corner of the vast room. "I have lived for 300 years," he said, "and for most of them I was cold. I ruled kingdoms, won wars, built an empire, but I was frozen inside, a man going through the motions of living without ever truly feeling alive." His grip on her hands tightened. "And then I found you, half buried in a snowdrift, running from monsters, choosing to freeze to death rather than be sold to one. And something inside me that had been frozen for centuries finally began to thaw." His golden eyes burned into hers. "You taught me that strength isn't about power, it's about surviving the cold and still having the courage to feel. You taught me that warmth isn't something you find in fireplaces or furs. It's something you find in another person's heart. And you taught me that love, real love, is worth waiting 300 years for. Tears spilled down Elise's cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. I love you, Elise. I will love you until the last winter passes and the sun burns out. And I will spend every day of my very long life making sure you're never cold again. The officiant pronounced them bonded, and Kaelin kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. The hall erupted in cheers, but Elise barely heard them. All she knew was his lips on hers, his arms around her, his warmth, finally, completely, hers. She was his queen now. She was home, 1 year later. Elise stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, watching the snow fall over the kingdom that had become her home. The same snow that had nearly killed her a year ago now seemed beautiful, peaceful, nothing to fear. So much had changed since then. Victor Thornwood was serving a 20-year sentence in the kingdom's harshest prison, his assets seized and distributed to the women he'd tried to sell over the years. It turned out Elise hadn't been his first victim, just the one who'd finally escaped to tell the tale. Lord Brennan had fared worse. The investigation into his household had uncovered horrors that made even hardened soldiers pale. He would never see the outside of a cell again, and his former servants, the ones who had survived, had been brought to the palace and given positions, safety, a chance to heal. Elise had made sure of that. As queen, she'd established sanctuaries across the realm for women fleeing forced marriages and abusive households. She called them hearth houses, and each one was marked by a symbol she'd designed herself, a cloak wrapped around a single flame. "You'll never be cold again," was the promise every woman heard when she walked through those doors. "Not while we're here." Arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back into Kaelin's chest with a contented sigh. "You're watching the snow again?" he murmured against her hair. "I used to be so afraid of it. The cold." She turned in his arms, resting her hands on his chest. "Now I find it beautiful." "That's because you know you're safe from it." His golden eyes were soft with love. "You know you'll never face it alone again." She rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to his jaw. "Do you remember what you said to me? That first morning, when I tried to return your cloak? I said you'd always be cold without me." His lips curved. "I meant it as a warning, a promise. I didn't realize it was also the truth about myself." "What do you mean?" "I was cold too, Elise. Before you. Cold for 300 years. He pulled her closer, his arms tightening around her. "You didn't just keep my cloak. You kept me. You thawed something in me that I thought was frozen forever." She felt tears prick at her eyes. Happy tears, the only kind she seemed to cry anymore. "I love you," she said. "Have I told you that today?" "Twice." His smile widened. "But I never tire of hearing it." "I love you?" She kissed his chin. "I love you." His cheek. "I love you." The corner of his mouth. He captured her lips before she could say it again, kissing her with a tenderness that still made her heart flutter even after a year. When they parted, the snow was falling heavier now, blanketing the world in white. But standing in her mate's arms, wrapped in warmth that had nothing to do with fireplaces or furs, Elise felt nothing but peace. "No regrets?" he asked, the question he'd asked her 100 times before. Elise thought about the girl who had fled into a blizzard, choosing death over a life without freedom. She thought about the woman who had stood in a great hall and told her tormentors exactly who she was. She thought about everything she had survived and everything she had gained. Not a single one, she said. And as Kaelin pulled her closer, as the snow fell softly around them and the fire crackled in the hearth behind them, Elise finally understood what it meant to be warm. She had been frozen once, alone, running from a fate worse than death. Now she was loved. She was home. She was exactly where she was meant to be, and she would never be cold again. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Until next time.